Chapter 33. Lucas and I passed through the final ring of border guards without seeing a single person, and by mid-morning caught a ride with a friendly trader who said he'd take us as far as Sayulai, near where Lucas said we'd meet Ben. Why don't we deliver these books first? I said. I don't know the priest. He'll be less suspicious if the books come directly from Ben. So we rode in the back of the wagon, both of us sleeping flat on our backs, too exhausted to care whether we looked ridiculous, whether we were headed in the right direction, whether we could trust this trader. I only woke up when Lucas shook my arm, saying, "We're here, Audra. We need to go." I groaned, but rolled out of the wagon and onto my feet. The sun had shifted in the sky, though I wasn't sure how far we'd gone or exactly what time it was. At least my clothes were dry and I was warm again. "We'll walk the rest of the way," Lucas told me after the trader had left. He couldn't be serious. I picked up my 2 sacks of books. How far? It probably wasn't far, but no matter how he answered, it would seem like half a world away. After all the walking I'd done lately, my legs were tired, my boots had holes in them, and I would have really preferred if the trader had just taken us all the way to wherever Ben was. Lucas and I turned down a dirt road marked only by wagon wheels that had crossed in from time to time, though even the road was overgrown with thick grasses. I took comfort from that. This wasn't a place where many people had gone before, which meant it wasn't a place the soldiers would have much interest in. "What what do you know of the Hill of Crosses?" Lucas asked as we walked. Nothing, which was true in that most literal sense. I'd never heard of it, and could only guess that its name had some religious significance. "I read a book on it," Lucas said. "About 60 years ago there was an uprising here." "The one that ended with all the books being banned?" Lucas chuckled. "No, that uprising was 30 years ago. But every generation has to try to prove itself against the Russian Empire, I suppose, and every uprising fails sooner or later, including the one 60 years ago. That fight happened on the same hill where we're now headed, and it became a major battle. So many fighters were killed that most families couldn't find the bodies of their loved ones. With no other way to mourn their loss, one family placed a cross on the site of the battle, and then another did it, and another. I heard that by now there are over 100 crosses. In honor of the dead?" Lucas shook his head. "Yes, but it's so much more now. The crosses are a reminder of the people who belong to this country, those who have fought to preserve it. It's an honor of all Lithuanians." "Like you?" I turned to him. "Were you born here in Lithuania, Lucas?" He stepped backward. "Of course." "Where?" He hesitated and then slowly shook his head. "It doesn't matter." "Do your parents know where you are?" When he didn't answer, I added, "Don't you miss them?" "I do miss my mother," he murmured. "So he had a mother somewhere," I said. Go see her." "To have my family back again, I would give up anything." "Even me?" I immediately fell silent as Lucas kicked at the ground and then said, "Would you even give me up, Audra? That's what Officer Rusakov had wanted from you, wasn't it?" I paused far too long as an ache worked its way through my chest, finally managing to say, "If you know that, then you also know that I refused his offer." "I do know that, but why didn't you tell me that he'd made the offer? Don't you think that's something I'd want to know?" "I didn't tell you." I had to say the rest, had to make myself say the words, no matter how difficult it was. "I couldn't tell you until I knew what I'd decided." He clicked his tongue and looked away, then after what felt like hours said, "I know how hard that decision must have been. Knowing that I'll never see my parents again is awful, but if I turned you over to Rusakov, then I'd be the cause of whatever he did to you, imprisonment or Siberia or hanging, and I couldn't live with that. Also," I cleared my throat, "I've never had a friend before, but I'm fairly sure turning you in would make me the worst friend ever." Despite the seriousness of our conversation, he smiled. "Yes, I believe it would. I'm sorry you had to make such a decision. I can't tell you if it was right or wrong, but I am glad I'm still here." By then we'd reached the Hill of Crosses, illuminated by a bright moon in the sky. The land was relatively flat all around, so although the hill wasn't particularly high, its very presence felt significant. And just as Lucas had described, at least 100 crosses had been planted into the ground, some made of wood, others of metal, some ornate and elegant, others equally beautiful in their simplicity. Lucas wandered at my side until he noticed a few old sticks that had fallen from a nearby tree. He broke off the ends of 2 of them and made a simple cross, then tied it with some twine from his pocket. "Here," he said, placing it in my hands, "for your parents and all that they fought for." "Thank you." I walked back to the hill and laid my cross on the beam of another large wooden cross. I believe if my parents knew what I was doing, they'd be proud. "You'll have to tell them all about it," Lucas replied, "when you see them again." He gave my hand a squeeze, and I realized how sad I would be if I couldn't do this work anymore, because it would mean I would no longer see him, likely ever again. The smuggling mattered, but my friendship with Lucas mattered as well. "They're here," a familiar voice called. I turned to see Milda waving at us with no disguise, just Milda in a striped skirt and a white shirt and an apron, a red vest, and with her gray hair up in a netted cap. I stared back at her without waving, trying to convince myself it really was Milda. A normal version of the woman I was used to seeing wasn't normal at all, which wasn't normal at all. She was standing in front of an empty wagon, feeding one of the horses. I ran down the hill and threw my arms around her, though when we separated, she put her hands on my shoulder. "Ben won't be happy to see you." "Indeed, I am not," he grunted, walking up behind us, his face in a deep frown. I'd already expected that from him, so I merely hugged him too, even though his arms remained stiffly at his side. "You saved me, Ben. You got me out of that prison." Once I released him, Ben scrunched his face and threw out a dismissive hand. "Nah, you saved yourself. A foolish girl like you, I knew you'd come up with a wilder scheme than I ever could get to you yourself than I ever could to get yourself back to us. I only needed to give you the right tools." "You didn't know it would work, though. What if I couldn't figure it out?" He turned to me and his expression became serious. "I won't always be there to save you or teach you. Lucas won't always be there to keep an eye on you. At some point, Audra, you were going to have to learn to look out for yourself, and you did. That's why you can trust me to be here now." "She was good at the border," Lucas said, offering me a hand into the back of the wagon. I gave him my books first and then climbed in with him. "Really good, and not just at the border, but everywhere she smuggles. Certainly better than I was when I started out." If Lucas never paid me another compliment in my life, I figured that was about the nicest thing he could have said, and I beamed with pride. "Where are we going?" I asked. "My place," Ben coughed as he climbed into the driver's seat beside Milda. A deep cough that concerned me, though he'd only scold me if I pointed it out. It isn't much for a home, but the Kozaks don't seem to know about it, so as far as I'm concerned, it's a castle. We drove for half an hour to a small hut in a tiny patch of woods, which I supposed was about as far from everything as a person could get. Ben was right to describe it in humble terms. The walls were made of logs that had been stacked and mudded together, and I expected the thatch roof likely collapsed with each new snowfall. But it had a small rock chimney, and smoke was coming from it, and even from out here I smelled something delicious. "We kept a stew warm for you," Milda said, "as we have every night, hoping that you would arrive safely." She dished up bowls of stew for both Lucas and me, then offered one to Ben, who said he wasn't hungry. He definitely wasn't feeling well. Even if I were on my deathbed, I'd still never refuse one of Milda's meals. While we ate, Milda sat across from me and said, "I still haven't decided whether to thank you or scold you. You traded yourself as a prisoner for me." "I did the right thing, Milda," I said, then lowered my eyes, "but only because I almost did the wrong thing. Officer Rusakov wanted me to give Lucas to him, and maybe Ben as well, so he was always planning to arrest me that night, because he was sure that I'd give him the names. I'd hoped he had I'd hoped he'd be so consumed with the thought of arresting me that he'd forget about you." My confusion clearly came as a surprise to Milda. Oh, my confession clearly came as a surprise to Milda and Ben, who both turned their attention to Lucas for his reaction. But with a kind of smile at me, Lucas said, "Audra and I already settled this." He finished with a wink, a reminder that suggested he understood and that there was nothing to forgive. With those few words, Milda's expression warmed again, and she said, "Well, in that case, I think you both need a double serving of supper." While I ate, I looked at Ben. "So what happens now?" Ben coughed again. "The same thing that Lucas was supposed to take care of before. You're leaving Lithuania, and this time we'll send Milda with you." I'd already anticipated that answer, but more than ever, I didn't want to leave. Not now, when I was finally figuring out how to do this work. "No, Ben, I can still help." He shook his head. "They know who you are. They've seen what you can do. If you're caught again, this time they probably won't even send you to Siberia. They'll hold a public hanging, prove to the people that everyone who breaks the law will be punished, no matter who it is." "They wouldn't hang someone as young as me," I said, realizing my hand had inadvertently gone to my neck. "They have before, and they will again if necessary. Until you're older, you're finished with smuggling." "I just need to be smarter about it like you are. You can teach me. You can show me what to do." Ben waved the idea away. "You haven't survived so far because of anything I've taught you. You survive on your instincts, your bag of magic tricks, and your foolish hope that there will ever be an end to this. I can't teach you to be smart or weed the foolishness out of you. That's just who you are." My cheeks warmed. "Then trust who I am and let me keep smuggling." "Your parents would agree with me, Audra. They would say—" "My parents aren't here anymore. Isn't that your whole point?" Then I'll act as your father, and I'm telling you. You're not my father, Ben, and you're not in charge of me. I realized I was yelling, but I didn't care. For once, I needed Ben to hear me. My parents left me alone, and now I have to make my own decisions. I don't care if you want me to continue smuggling or not. I will do it because that's what I've decided. Ben opened his mouth and then closed it and stared at me. After he had calmed himself, he shook his head. No, you will not. First chance we get, Lucas and I are taking you and Milda out of Lithuania. I slammed my spoon down on the table and then threw back my chair and stomped outside. They let me stay there until my temper had cooled off, and when I walked back inside, Milda only pointed to a bedroll that had been laid open on the floor near the fire. That's for you, she said. Take a few days to rest, and I'm sure you'll begin to see that Ben is right. With some reluctance, I thanked her and lay down to sleep, but it didn't come easily to me. All I could think about as I finally closed my eyes was that I already knew that Ben was right. The smartest thing to do was to leave the country and get to where it was safe. And despite that, I intended to stay. There was still more books to be carried, more shelves to be filled. I couldn't give up now. And that's the end of chapter 33. See you later. Bye.